Hello my fellow working class heroes, good day. I am Carlo and welcome to Carlo Excels. These are the objectives of this episode. We're gonna talk about the basic text functions in this episode. We're gonna talk about the trim, upper, lower, and proper functions, their definitions, and their basic applications to us teachers. Let's go ahead and start with the trim function. The trim function from Microsoft Excel's own help document. The trim function removes all spaces from text except for single spaces between words. Use trim on text that you have received from another application that may have irregular spacing. For the trim function, the function name is trim, and for the function arguments, there's only one. It's just looking for text. From the definition of the trim function removes spaces. So let's clarify the kinds of spaces that the trim function removes. The trim function removes first, leading spaces, or in other words, extra spaces before the text actually starts. And then it removes trailing spaces, in other words, extra spaces that happen after the text has ended. And then if there are multiple spaces between text, it removes that as well. What we have here on the screen right now is an illustration of the kind of text data that the trim function can definitely help with. This is sample text data that the trim function can definitely help with. So you have here text data right there, and these underscores here represent instances wherein the space bar was actually pressed. So you have one space in the beginning, and then you have three spaces in the middle of text, and then one space over here, you have two spaces over here, and then you have one space at the end of text. Now if we look at the screen, the second line here represents what happens to the first line after the trim function has been administered. So you will notice that after the trim function is administered, the trailing spaces will be removed, any leading spaces will be removed, and if there are multiple instances of spaces between text, all of them will be reduced to just one space. So let's try doing the trim function. Now, we have here on the first line the original text. So we have here the 3 quick brown foxes jump over the 4 lazy dogs. And then let's try this untrimmed text. Same words, the 3 quick brown foxes jump over the 4 lazy dogs. But in this case, you will notice that there are leading spaces. In other words, there are spaces typed in before the word the. And there are also spaces typed in after the word dogs, after the period. And there is an inconsistent number of spaces between some of the words. Some words only have one space and some words have multiple spaces between them. This is the kind of text that the trim function can definitely help with. So let's do the trim function. So let's put it here, text after the trim. So let's do the trim function. So equals and then function name trim and then open parenthesis. All we have to do is to click on the original, the cell with the original text, the untrimmed text like so. And then when you do a close parenthesis and then of course press enter, you will notice now that the text is properly trimmed. The text now has lost its leading spaces, it has now lost its trailing spaces, and there is now consistently one space between all of the text. Next, let's talk about the upper function. The upper function from Microsoft Excel's help document, it just says 4 words, converts text to uppercase. For the upper function, the function name is upper and the function arguments are simply just text. Next, the lower function. The lower function from Microsoft Excel's own help document converts all uppercase letters in a text string to lowercase. For the lower function, the function name is lower, and for the function arguments, it is still simply just text. And last for this episode, we have the proper function. The proper function from Microsoft Excel's own help document capitalizes the first letter in a text string and any other letters in text that follow any character other than a letter, converts all other letters to lowercase letters. And for the proper function, the function name is proper, and for the function arguments, yes, it is still just text. So let's try the upper function in this untrimmed text. So what we can do is, we have here equals and then upper, the function name, and then open parenthesis. Let's click on the untrimmed text and then close parenthesis, and then let's see what happens. When you press enter, you will now notice that The upper function capitalized, or in other words, put into uppercase, all of the letters that you see here in the untrimmed text. I hope you notice that the upper function, of course, ignores all of the spaces. No matter how many spaces there are, the upper function simply just copies all of that, no problem. At the same time, the upper function does not convert into uppercase the numbers. They are still just numbers. Now let's try the lower function. So press equal sign and then call out the function name, lower. Let's try it again on the untrimmed text. So we click on that cell there and then close parenthesis and then press enter. You can now make a comparison between the upper function and the lower function. Whereas the upper function, puts all of the letters into the uppercase. In other words, capitalizes all of the letters. The lower function converts all of the letters into lowercase. In other words, makes them into small letters. And just like the upper function, the lower function simply takes all of the letters and converts them to lowercase letters. It does not care about the spaces. It will simply copy however the spaces originally looked like and will do the same in the result. And of course, the numbers are not converted to lowercase numbers. The numbers are simply just numbers. And let's try the proper function. So the proper function, again, let's call out the function name, proper, like this. And then open parenthesis, and then once again we click on the untrimmed text like so, and then close parenthesis, and that is our result. So you can see on the screen the comparison between the upper function, the lower function, and the proper function. The upper function capitalizes all of the letters, the lower function converts to lowercase all of the letters, and the proper function capitalizes the first letter of every word. So of course, just like the upper and the lower functions, the proper function does not care about spaces. However the spaces look like in the original text, you will have the same kind of spacing after you administer the proper function. Now, one important thing that you should know regarding the basic text functions is this. The basic text functions, trim, upper, lower, and the proper functions can be nested. In other words, putting a function within a function, just like most other functions in Microsoft Excel. So let's do this. Let's take the untrimmed text and then let's apply the upper, the lower, and the proper functions to that, and then let's trim the result. So let's try doing that. Let's reset all of these cells there. So first, for the upper function, let's try again upper, like so, and then the untrimmed text there. So to nest this, all we have to do is enclose this in the trim function. So this is what we do, trim, and then this is what we enclose as our text argument. So in other words, you're telling Microsoft Excel to trim whatever the result is for this function here. And when you press enter, you will now notice that you have all capital letters, and then the result has been properly trimmed of all of the excess spaces. For the lower function, it works the same way. So we have here lower, and then this text here, and then let's trim the result by nesting the lower function within the trim function like so, just like what we did with the upper function. And we press enter. Of course, you will now notice that you have lowercase letters and the result has now been properly trimmed. Proper function, same thing. So let's do proper, and then this same text here, and whatever the result is, we want Microsoft Excel to trim, and then we have this result. So you will notice now that the trim function, the upper function, the lower function, and the proper function, they're very, very handy. They're very, very useful, especially for cases of large rosters. If you want rosters or lists of names of students or teachers, and you want them shown in a concise and uniform manner, then the trim, the upper, the lower, and the proper function is what you need. This is especially true, of course, if you are a teacher working with 80 plus students, or if you are a registrar working with thousands of students. Whatever the case, the trim, upper, lower, and proper function will work for you. Here is an example of something that actually happens to us teachers. Say, for example, you ask for the list of names of students, and just to make it look good, what they did was they listed down all of the names but decided to separate first names and then middle initials and last names, just like what you can see on the document right here. So you have here the number, the student number, and then you have a few spaces after the number, and then you have the first name, and then you have a few spaces after the first name, then you have the middle initial, and then a lot of spaces after the middle initial towards the last name of the student. So if you print a document like this, well, it will look nice because at least the first names are separated from the middle initials and they're also separated from the last names. However, transferring data that looks like this to Microsoft Excel is going to be such a pain, especially if you plan to use this data for further formulas, because the data is going to look like this. You have an inconsistent number of spaces between data, and this is not going to be easy to work with in Microsoft Excel. So let's try cleaning up this data. What we're gonna do is, we're gonna remove all of the extra spaces. We're gonna remove these numbers right before the data. And then, we're going to capitalize all of the letters in the names. In other words, let's insert a bit of consistency. How do we do all of that? I'm gonna show you how. First thing we're gonna do is, we're going to use the replace command to remove all of these numbers before the data so that we can apply trimming afterwards. Now, I already discussed the replace command in a past episode. Please check the descriptions below this video for our link to the replace command lesson. It's a very, very useful lesson in Microsoft Excel. I really suggest that you watch it first before proceeding with this video. So let's study our data so we know how to properly administer the replace command. So you will notice that the way this was numbered is you have a dot here, then you have a close parenthesis right before each name, and you want to remove any instances of dot, close parenthesis, and anything before that dot and the parenthesis. So what we do is we select all of this data and then we press Ctrl H to bring up the replace command. So what we're looking for is any instance of a dot and close parenthesis, and then once, just like what we discussed in the replace command lesson, we put a wildcard here. In other words, any data that ends with a dot and a parenthesis, and then we replace it with nothing. In other words, we're asking Microsoft Excel to find all of the data that look like this and remove all of them. So when we press replace all, you will notice that all of that has now been replaced by nothing. Next is, we cannot exactly use the replace command to remove all of the spaces, because if we use the replace command to remove all of the spaces, just like what I'm doing here, you will notice that that's not the kind of data that you want. So press Ctrl Z to undo that. So what we want to do is, we want to remove all of the leading spaces, then you want to remove all of the extra spaces between the text data, and then remove all of the trailing spaces if there are any. And then of course, after removing all of those extra spaces, we want to convert all of this data into uppercase letters. So thankfully, we already know how to use the trim function in the upper function. So let's apply the trim function like so. We want to trim this, close parenthesis, and then in this case, let's try it the other way around. Let's trim it first, and then whatever the result is, we will convert into uppercase letters. So we will nest the trim function within the upper function, just like what I'm doing on the screen right now. So you're telling Microsoft Excel, trim the data in A1, and then whatever the result is, convert it into uppercase letters. And when you press enter, that is exactly what you get. And of course, just like what we already discussed in previous lessons, by simply copying this and pasting this downward, naturally the cell references will adjust, and therefore you will get all of the data now properly trimmed and now properly converted to uppercase letters in seconds. Take note that removing all of the spaces individually for all of this data, especially for thousands, or in this case 200 students plus, might take you more or less 45 minutes to an hour if you're slow, or 20 minutes if you're fast, but you can do it in seconds with the trim function and the upper function. So let's try another situation. Another very common situation to us teachers. In this case, spaces were not used. These are not spaces, these are tabs. So in this case, to make the data look nice and to align all of the first names and the middle initials and the last names, let's say for example that the registrar used tabs to make the list look nice. So when you print it, yeah, it looks really nice. It looks really organized and aligned. However, once again, using data that looks like this is a pain to use in Microsoft Excel because you will have data that will look like that. Well, of course, some of you may see the screen and might probably be already thinking, I can work with this kind of data. It's just a matter of aligning the last names and then concatenating all of this using the ampersand. It might look easy if you're only dealing with maybe 20 students in your class or 30 students in your class, but if you're dealing with hundreds of students or thousands of students, there's an easy way to do this in seconds with the trim, the trim function, the upper function, and of course, the replace command. Well, the solution to this problem goes like this. We first have to convert all of the tabs to spaces. Again, we convert all of the tabs to spaces, and when you convert all of the tabs to spaces, you have the exact same situation as a while ago. So after converting all of the tabs to spaces, put it to Microsoft Excel, use replace command to remove all of these numbers, and then apply trim and the upper functions. So let's do that. First, we have to get the tab character. So we look for a tab, just like what I'm doing. If you can see what I'm doing on the screen, I'm going to highlight a tab and then press Ctrl C on my keyboard, or you can also do it like this, copy. Now, press Ctrl H so that you bring up the replace command in Microsoft Word, just like what you see here. And then what you do is you paste the tab here. So you're asking Microsoft Excel to find any instances of tabs, and then you replace it. You ask Microsoft Word rather to replace it with a space, just like what you can see here. So, or rather, just like what you cannot see here. So you ask Microsoft Word to find a tab and then replace it with any space. When you press replace all, you will now notice, of course, that all instances of tabs have now been replaced by spaces. So we now have data that looks like this. So what we can do is we copy all of this, and then let's then paste it into Microsoft Excel. So we paste all of that here, just like what you see on the screen. This was the data that came from Microsoft Excel. And just like what we did a while ago, let's first remove all of these numbers using the replace command, just like what we did a while ago, wildcard dot close parenthesis, and then replace it with nothing. So we effectively remove it, just like what I did just now. So we now only have the problem of leading spaces and then extra spaces between the words. So we will then do an upper and then a trim nested inside the upper function, just like so. Whoops. Just like so. And then copy paste all of that downwards, and you have done what would have taken you like minutes to do, you've done in seconds. So that's it for the trim, the upper, the lower, and the proper functions in Microsoft Excel and their applications. Once again, I am Carlo, and this is Carlo Excels. Thank you very much for watching.